Welcome to the Exploratory. A lot of people say that they test APIs in Postman, but what they really mean is that they update a request and then see what they get back from the server. In this video, we'll write a test in Postman, learn about different API tests, and also how to automate those tests. Let's check it out in Postman. Let's use this collection called Intro to Writing Tests with examples. If you want to follow along at home, I'll drop a link to this collection and you can fork the collection to your own public workspace at home. Let's take a look at the collection documentation. This collection will cover basic test syntax, different types of API tests, and integration testing. Let's load up the first folder, Basic Test Syntax, and take a look at the first request called PM Test. This is a call made to Postman's Echo service, which just echoes back what we send it. Under the Tests tab, you can see that there's a couple examples here, but let's just try it out. Most of the areas in Postman are text editors. So if I update the value here, this is a text editor. There's two places in Postman where you can write JavaScript: the Prerequest tab and the Tests tab, to run before or after your main request. So under tests, I can manually enter some JavaScript here, or if I've never written a test before, I'm going to look here on the right under snippets. These are popular code snippets, and you can see we can get and set different types of variables. We can assert that the status code is 200, or the response body contains certain things, is equal to a certain value, or there's content types. So these are popular snippets. What I'm going to do is place my cursor on an empty row and find a snippet called status code is 200. When I click that, you can see that Postman inserts 3 lines of code. This is a Postman test. Let's take a look at the syntax. So to write a Postman test, you're going to use the pm.test function. This function takes 2 parameters. The first parameter will be a string, and that's going to be the name of our test. If we write a bunch of tests, this name is going to help us identify the test in the test results. So make sure that it's meaningful to you. The second parameter in pm.test is going to be a function. Your function will contain all sorts of assertions about what you expect back from the API that will evaluate to a Boolean or a true or false value. So for example, if this assertion is false, is not true, then the whole test will fail. If the assertion is true, then the test will pass. So let's go ahead and send this request and see what we get in our test results. When you hit send, I'm zoomed in really heavily, but you might see this across tabs here. Go ahead and tab over to test results, and you can see I have 3 tests. The first 2 are from the example that we scrolled really quickly past, and the last test is the one that we just inserted into this editor. The name of our test is status code is 200, that's here, and it passed because we got a 200 OK status code back, and that's what we asserted. Let's go ahead and update this value and say we assert we believe that we will receive a 404. Now, if we get back a 404, this test should pass. And if we don't get back a 404, this test will fail. Let's hit send again. And you can see this test has failed because we expected the response to have 404, but instead we got 200 once again. So that's basic test syntax. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into the pm.expect and pm.response differences, take a look at that second request. But all this syntax is ChaiJS. So I'll drop a link to the ChaiJS docs, and I'll also show you a little bit later on where to find some test snippet examples besides the handy dandy right side snippets. Okay, let's move on to API tests. The second folder in our collection shows a couple different types of tests that you can write. We already took a look at the status, but you can assert different performance. Let's take a look under the test tab and see, here's an assertion that says the response time should be below 200 milliseconds. So if we send this, you can see under test results, oh, we have a failing test because we asserted that the response time would be less than 200, but it actually came back at, you can see it in the Postman UI here, as well as reflected in the test failure message. Expected 377 to be below 200, and it wasn't. That evaluated as false, so that's a failed test. So take a look at some of these other types of API tests you can write. You can write functional tests, API quote-unquote unit tests, schema validation, SQL injections, a couple different examples here that you can walk through. All right, let's head to this last folder here called integration tests and open the first folder using variables, and we can see two requests in this folder. One is a GET request to get the Bitcoin exchange rate, and the other one is to echo the exchange rate. So if we load up Bitcoin exchange rate, we can see we're making a call to the CoinDesk API, and if we hit send, we can take a look at the response we get back from the server. And this is the current price of Bitcoin in USD. And if we go under the test tab, the last time we were under the test tab, we wrote a Postman test, but you can write any kind of JavaScript, like setting and getting variables. You can make calculations, write conditionals, whatever you want to do in JavaScript, you can do under the test tab. So let's take a look at what we wrote. We are parsing the response that we get back from the server, and we are also setting an environment variable. So if we go ahead and hit send, you can see that under the environment, we actually programmatically set an environment with the value of the Bitcoin rate. So we don't have to copy anything to our clipboard and then load up a new request and paste it in. We're going to be programmatically setting and then also getting this variable. Okay, so let's move on to the next request, echo the exchange rate. You can see we're using the double curly braces syntax to get our variable in one of the text fields, and Postman is reading in this value from the actively selected environment. So we can go ahead and echo it back to us down here. So that's how you use variables. Variables are very helpful to extract data from one. Variables are very helpful to extract data from one API and pass it along to another API call. In this example, we used an environment variable, but you can also use globals, collection, local variables. There's a bunch of different variable types that we'll explain in another video. So that's using variables. Let's go ahead and look at scenario. And if I want to dive deeper into any of these examples, you can always expand the sidebar to take a look at the documentation. But what I see here is that I'm fetching a list of items. I'm going to be creating an item, verifying that the new item exists, and so on and so forth. This is a scenario test, and I can see that I can use variables to extract data, maybe the new ID of the item I created, to verify that the new item exists by calling it by ID, and so forth. The example is pointing to localhost, and I don't actually have anything running on port 3002 on my Mac machine right here, so I don't expect anything back, but this folder is just illustrative of the types of tests that you can write. Okay, so this next folder appears to be, let's hover over this to load up the name, appears to be a contract test. So if you are a microservices team, you might use consumer-driven contract tests. Take a look at this example here, read through the documentation. The Postman engineering team actually uses this kind of format of folder structure. They divide their API calls that are responsible for setting up and for tearing down. And then they also have a separate folder for tests that they actually want to run. So when you organize your calls into setup and tear down like this, you can clean up after yourself so you're not polluting your test environment. And this last one using mocks. So you can see there's 2 requests here, and this is replicating the 2 requests that we saw earlier under using variables. The first example, we made a call to the CoinDesk API, and then we echoed that exchange rate. But what if we're running tests and we don't get back what we expect? Is it because the CoinDesk API is down, or is it because the Echo service is down? What you can do is you can mock out your third-party dependencies. In this case, we're mocking out CoinDesk API by subbing in our mock server. So if we hit send, you can see that we're returning a we're returning a response that was actually created in 2018. And in fact, if you're curious what the price of Bitcoin was in 2018, you can see that you probably should have invested in Bitcoin. But we are mocking out a third-party dependency, which allows us to echo the exchange rate back to us. And you can see that 2018 price coming back to us. So take a look at these examples, and if you want more test snippets besides what's available under the test tab on the right, start here if you've never written a Postman test before. But this workspace contains all sorts of test examples in Postman. One collection that I'll call your attention to is test script examples. This contains a bunch of test scripts from the documentation. So I'm going to open up the docs. And if you're reading through the Postman docs and you're like, wow, look at all this stuff that I can assert. Look at all these code snippets. I wish I didn't have to copy and paste them all into my instance of Postman so that I could make it work. Well, you're welcome. I've copied and pasted it all into there for you. So you can go ahead and fork this example to your local workspace in Postman and test out some of those examples, especially if you're not familiar with Postman tests or ChaiJS syntax. And that's it. We learned how to write a test in Postman, how to build a test suite with a collection or a collection of collections, which is the underpinning of automation in Postman. Stay tuned for some of our other videos where we learn how to run collections. From the Postman app using the collection runner, from Postman Cloud using Postman monitors, and from your command line or in your CI environment with Newman.